8 gallons of pure alcohol per year. By 1830, they're drinking 7.8 gallons per year. So this was one of the reasons why they wanted to start prohibition. They felt that this was going to help alleviate family issues, that it was going to clean up the health and hygiene of America, alleviate social issues, things like that. But this did not happen. Crime rates skyrocketed. Murder rates across the nation rose 78% almost immediately. Organized crime, those continued to rise. People like Al Capone, in his first 2 years of running, he made over $60 million in untaxed income by running bootleg liquor. Thousands of jobs were lost. In 1927, 12,000 people died across the nation from drinking tainted liquor. So tens of thousands of people were dying. So prohibition did nothing to help anybody. So what does that mean for Koochiching County? In 1910, the Falls had 27 saloons. Mizpah, which peaks in population between 1911 and 1924, and they're like this big. They have 150 people. They have 16 saloons to themselves. Rainier has about 14 at the time. By 1914, however, Minnesota has a lot of stuff going on. They decided they're going to start passing some legislation that makes it so you cannot issue liquor licenses outside of your city limits. So International Falls loses 10 saloons. Then they also decide that other villages and cities are going to start going dry. The temperance movement is really picking up pace. 14 cities go dry, and so do 125 townships. Pelham and Indus are the first two places in Koochiching that decide that they're going to vote dry. But what happens when a township votes dry? Well, it turns out that they lose tax income. So when they pay for a liquor license, the city then loses money for infrastructure because they automatically take half of that money and set it aside for roads and things like that. Well, Indus and Pelham, they're basically in the middle of nowhere, and they were like, well, you know what, we really like having roads, so we're going to give you your liquor license anyway, and they completely decide to ignore the city vote. So then the Falls decides that they're also going to host a vote. They want to see if they're going to stay a party town, or are we going to go dry? It turns out they want to decide to stay wet, so they vote wet 539 to 214 in that year. But the dries, you know what, they take it pretty well, and they decide, you know what, we have momentum here, and they really hammer hard in a lot of their campaign ads through the next year into 1915. So by 1915, all of the communities in Koochiching are dry, except International Falls, Koochiching Township, and Craigville. They're the only three that are still hanging on by staying wet. So they decide that they're going to host another vote, which they do, and they stay wet again. Now the dries at this point are really upset, and this is like the 1915 version of voter fraud. They decide that they're going to blame basically all of the hobos, the people who are non-taxpayers, non-citizens, things like that. So in August of the same year, they host another vote, and then the dry vote completely passes, and Koochiching is finally a dry county. Now this becomes a problem because a lot of people, like the mayor, who was Frank Keys at the time, he owns a lot of the property, and there was concern of collusion in the town. So they start really watching these city councilmen because they decide that they're going to defy the vote and keep the town open. So they're still selling liquor at this time, despite the dry vote. So what they end up doing is they go and they get an injunction against the city council. Shortly after that, they have a strike, and then Frank Keys ends up having to close pretty much all of the establishments except 4. He leaves 4, soda fountain establishments open, and they continue to sell booze until the end when Prohibition finally passes, which is in 1917 for Minnesota. Minnesota finally goes dry, and they're one of the first. So that is where Mike can come in, and you can start talking about your stories. You have a lot.
Well, thank you, Ashley. She kind of laid the foundation for a lot of what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to thank one more person, a person that I've never met. His name is Hiram Brock, and he wrote a book called Taming the Wilderness. And it's a wealth of information about, the history of this area, Koochiching County, part of St. Louis County. And I'm going to start off with a quote from Hiram Brock in his book, Taming the Wilderness. He interviewed a man by the name of Jess Rose. According to Jess Rose, a career customs employee in the area, probably the largest moonshine operator or ringleader, as he was referred to, was Bob Williams of Rainier. Williams hired all of his work done and was never caught, even though the custom officials knew he was the man behind the scene. His front was a soft drink bar and restaurant at Rainier. Some of Rose's neighbors worked for Williams as smugglers. Now, Bob Williams, Robert Sloan Williams, was my grandfather. He was born in Wisconsin in 1876, served in the Spanish-American War, moved to Rainier prior to 1918. His occupation at that time was a cook. He purchased Brennan's Saloon in Rainier and the Kettle Falls Hotel in 1918. Now, it's a well-known fact that the purchase price for the hotel was $1,000 and 4 barrels of whiskey. Now, Minnesota at that time, as Ashley mentioned, was dry. So we really don't know if that whiskey that he used in the purchase price was of his own manufacturer or smuggled from Canada. I'm now going to offer up another quote. This is a 1976 interview with Hiram Brock. He interviewed my father, Charlie Williams. And I quote, "My dad used to bring it in from Canada. We used to bring alcohol in here by boxcars full, gallons of grain alcohol, and they in turn would make liquor out of it, bottle it, and everything else. All over the U.S., I know. My dad had an airplane, and my dad used to fill that airplane full of booze and take it to St. Louis or Kansas City or someplace. You see, booze was real high. If they thought it was good booze, it would be as high as $300 a case." End of quote. The location that my grandpa had, in this immediate area, is the house and property where Manny Herzig lives, just down the road here on Old Highway 11. But there were perils involved in the smuggling, of course, but the money was so good that they did it. One of my favorite stories that my dad told, he called it the $10,000 dog. He had a load of liquor coming across the bridge here in a rail car. And he had purchased a dog up in Canada for my dad. And the dog started barking, and the customs official ordered the sealed car unlocked. They got the dog out and discovered a set of shingles on the rail car that was full of whiskey. So apparently my grandpa suffered a $10,000 loss on that one. But he undoubtedly would have used boats in the summer. That was a little more stealth. Easily crossing, the miles of shoreline on Rainy Lake with liquor. And he also used horse-drawn sleighs. I heard a story from an old timer, quite a few years ago now, but he was involved where they would pick up liquor on the Canadian side with fairly large sleighs, maybe 2, maybe 4 horses. They would cross Rainy Lake, go through Black Bay, up the Rat Rut. And Highway 53 at that time, in the early 20s, was passable in the winter months. And they would stash the liquor. And that barn is still there. If you leave Ray going south, left-hand side of the road, there's a small barn, but there's a large, very dilapidated one behind, still standing. But they would stash the booze in that particular barn. Then it would be picked up by trucks later on, for points south. But my grandpa had stills scattered around too. His largest in this immediate area was right there where Manny Herzig lives now. I guess there were even interconnecting underground tunnels for storage and, hiding whatever. The first one that I ever saw was uncovered by the Park Service in Kettle Falls, right where the new, I still call it the new Marina Project is. They found a lot of artifacts in that one that you see at the Red Wing pottery jugs that you see at the museum at the Rainy Lake Visitor Center. A friend of mine discovered a still at buoy number 6, the real narrow spot of the American Channel. And he found a bunch of artifacts there from that bootleg era. And just last year, I tried to rediscover that site, and I could find nothing of it. The moss and everything has grown up through the years, but it's there. Maybe eventually I'll find it someday. There's another still over by what we call the Canadian Dam at Kettle Falls. It was operated by a local guy called the Moonshine Joe. Of course, the island is still called by locals this day, Moonshiner Island. Lauren Erickson's, what we call Warren's Bay, the northeast corner, there's remnants there up in the woods of the still, undoubtedly one of my grandpa's. And still, I can think back of my early days at Kettle Falls, where tourists would come in with these rose-colored bottles, old whiskey bottles that they'd find just when they were, just stopping off for lunch somewhere, or they were going out in the woods for whatever reason. They also would find jugs, ceramic jugs. And even one time somebody showed up with a full-sized, intact copper boiler. Fairly good size, 3 or 4 feet by 2 or 3 feet. And then another time, somebody showed up with a boiler identical to that one, but it was crushed, undoubtedly, in a raid by the revenuers. So. Now my grandpa, of course, operated some establishments, as was mentioned earlier. We call them wine pigs or speakeasies. We had the one here in Rainier, on the exact site where the post office exists today. And of course, he had the Kettle Falls Hotel, which was notorious in its own self. And at that time, it was referred to, or maybe now, what happened back then is that they called it the 3 companions, which was liquor, gambling, and prostitution. But today we're just going to talk about liquor. And then there's a little known fact on the lake, a very, very popular spot called the Golden Gate. It's at the east end of Dryweed Island, and in between Dryweed Island, very protected cove between Dryweed and Drywood Island. Like I say, it was called the Golden Gate. The St. Louis County, Koochiching County line went right through the center of it. And I was told that they had barges inside that protected cove, and whenever the heat would come on, let's say from St. Louis County, they would move the barges 100 yards or so west to Koochiching, and then vice versa when the heat would come on from Koochiching County. But that was the Golden Gate. Island View Lodge, not many people realize it was rather a notorious spot. It was built in 1909, so it was here, through that whole era. And undoubtedly, Grandpa Bob helped supply that particular place, whatever was needed. And but the traffic at that time up and down the lake existed because, simply because of the logging and the tremendous number of men that were involved with, cutting the logs for this whole part of the country. But there were a lot more stills than that, as Ashley referred to. One of the favorite ones that I just recently discovered, and Wayne Lindstrom's here somewhere tonight. Is he back there? But his grandpa, Axel Lindstrom, his place was raided there on Lindstrom Road, which a lot of people call the KOA Road now, County Road 109. But they found 20 50-gallon barrels of whiskey at his farm. And the local paper said that was enough for 25 drinks for every man, woman, and child in International Falls. Then there were some local addresses, where they uncovered significant amounts. And I just wrote down a couple: 806 9th Street in the Falls, 720 7th Street. There were a lot of them. But then, it wasn't all fun and games. As Ashley mentioned earlier, you had to be really, really careful about what you drink. And of course, that was one of the reasons I think my grandpa was successful, is his stuff was, it wouldn't poison you outright. It'd take years. But there was a native fellow by the name of Johnny Claypipe. They described him as the best gator man around, meaning that, he was quick, agile, when they're, dragging these logs down the area lakes. But he and one of his companions decided to make liquor at their little shack down at the Ash River. One of the local foresters stopped weeks or so later, and just to check on him. And Johnny Claypipe's partner was deceased in an advanced state of decomposition. Johnny was basically out of his mind. He lost his mind. And a short time later, he actually committed suicide here on jumping off the Rainier Bridge. And then Herb Williams, a close family friend forever, told me this story. He and a companion in the winter, somewhere on the lake, were making, whiskey. They had a still going. And they were picked up by a couple of revenuers, let's call them, by car and arrested. They insisted on handcuffing both Herb and his companion, but Herb, knew the lake very well. He knew the ice conditions very well, refused to be handcuffed. And sure enough, they're continuing down the lake. Herb's companion handcuffed in the back seat. The truck or car broke through the ice, immediately went to the bottom, and Herb and the two revenuers, escaped. And his friend is still on the bottom of Rainy Lake somewhere inside that truck. When they finally did get to safety, the revenuers told Herb this never happened. It was never reported. Poor guy is still out the lake there. And then my dad had a similar story. He was not that involved with, that's Charlie Williams, my dad. He was not that involved with the liquor trade, but he must have been a little bit, at least at this one incident. But he and a companion were following another truck loaded with sugar on the way to Kettle Falls. And they got through the Lost Bay Portage and were heading out into Saginaw Bay, and the lead truck broke through the ice and sank immediately. And of course they were horrified that we're going to lose this guy. And all of a sudden he popped to the surface. And that's 40 to 60 feet of water. I don't know if he rode it all the way to the bottom or whatever, but the guy recovered. They got him aboard and they retreated and finished the job days later.
That's why the walleyes are so sweet in Saginaw Bay.
Boy, that's the truth. Probably one of my favorite reefs. But then there was at Kettle Falls, maybe the most notorious thing that ever happened at Kettle Falls. A man by the name of Jack Ryan had a trading post in Anamic inside of Kettle Falls. And he was found murdered in 1925. And he was known to carry a substantial amount of money on himself. And I can't see him, making a lot of money selling the tinned meat or whatever. So undoubtedly, he was in the moonshine trade. But who knows? That's one question that'll never be answered. But there also were some humorous stories. My dad told me that adjacent to my grandpa's house, which is now Manny Herzig's, the neighbors had pigs, and the pigs got into the mash. And they went on a drunken rampage all the way from over at Manny's house all the way through right here. And then another story, one of my grandpa's very, very trusted employees, they had a still right at Kettle Falls. It must have been close to the kitchen because there was a bear showed up and it was a problem, and it was raiding them at night, disrupting the whole operation. So this trusted employee had the sack of sugar next to him. Of course, it's dark. Got his 30-30 in his lap, probably sampling the wares a little bit, and we had to make sure it was fit to drink. But when he woke up in the morning, the bag of sugar was gone. But then there were some notorious visitors too. The only story that I've ever heard concerned the gangster from St. Paul and we live in Kansas City, of course, the north side of Chicago, by the name of Bugs Moran. He was up here. My grandpa obviously, was a business associate of him. But he was here in the fall deer hunting with my dad. My dad was just a very young man at that time, Grandpa Bob, and others, of course. But they dropped my dad off in the bottom of Saginaw Bay to hunt deer. He ended up getting one. And by the time that he dressed it out and got back to the shore, it was dark and they'd ceased looking for him, for the night. So I remember my dad telling me that he slept in a hollowed out log, to survive. In the morning, one of the locals, Clarence Dutchy Ovison, came along by boat, found my dad, brought him back to the houseboat. And Bugs Moran was so relieved, he must have liked my father, that he gave Dutchy $20, which was, a good amount of money in those days. But as you travel down the lake, there's different islands that got their names through that bootleg era. And my favorite of all of them was called Boobs Island. Fred Boob Williams from Rainier was, a trusted associate of my grandfather. In fact, his right-hand man, he would have been his bouncer over here at the nightclub. But he was traveling down the lake one night, delivering liquor, either to Kettle Falls or from, and he ran aground on one of the islands just north of Anderson Bay. The name on the map of those islands is Minnetaki, I think that's how you'd say it, where Jimbo McCarthy has got a little cabin on. And so that was Boobs Island. But Judy Blaze, who used to write for the Rainy Lake Chronicle, somehow transferred that name over to what we called Sunset Island, a beautiful bare rock island with lots of blueberries on it. So now that is the official Boobs Island. It's, it's on the maps in everybody's mind. So. Then there's a place that we call Williams Reef, Green Buoy number 39. My grandpa apparently ran aground on that reef. And so they've got the name Williams Reef. It's only called that by a few locals now, including, like Vern Johnson. Then there's Jug Island on Namakan Lake, and Jug Island on Captodma Lake. Obviously drop-off spots for liquor. Then there's an island on the east end, the northeast end of Captodma. On the maps, it's called Round Bear Island. Misnamed. The real name is Round Bar Island. There was a blind pig on the island that had a round bar. But that name again is to be forever changed. But my dad never really spoke much about that Prohibition era. And he was born in 1908. He was only 10 years old when he came to Rainier in 1918. And he would have met my mother, Blanche Doreen Jesperson, daughter of a dairy farmer. And so and they were married in 1931, so when they were going together, I don't think it would have gone over very well with my grandfather, Andrew Jesperson, who was a dairy farmer and a teetotaler. So I think my dad kind of backed out of the trade there quite early and left to work for Henry Keys in the woods. But now Fred Williams, that's a different story. They were as close as family, the Williams family here in Rainier. Like I mentioned earlier, he was my Grandpa Bob's right-hand man. And their family and our family, of course, are friends to this day. In fact, Fred's children referred to my Grandpa Bob as their Grandpa Bob. He probably spent more time with them than us. But as Ashley mentioned, Prohibition was repealed in late 1933. But still, Kettle Falls could not sell liquor. The state laws in Minnesota said that you had to be in a incorporated, city in order to issue a liquor license. But that changed in 1968 when we were sitting in the lobby watching a grainy 10 o'clock news out of Duluth on the television. And it was announced that the Kettle Falls Hotel had just been issued St. Louis County seasonal liquor license #1. Of course, we all charged into the bar to celebrate. But then, the very next day, I was bartending alone, and it was a busy day, serving drinks. And Greg Sertich, the sheriff of Koochiching County, came in the front door, full uniform. I still remember it was a white uniform with a lot of patches on it, with a couple of deputies. And he said to me, he said, "Mike, you can't sell that drink." But in his hand, he had a piece of paper. And I said, "Yes, I can." And all he did was laugh, and he saddled up to the bar. But then I immediately served, of course, the last illegal drink, and the next drink I served was the first legal one. So we said but to tell you the truth, I can't remember if they had a cocktail or not. I know that we used to serve the sheriff liquor when he was in civilian uniform, but probably didn't in uniform. But then a little bit later in history here is kind of an interesting side note to the repeal of prohibition. It's the story of the city of Island View. I'm sure that most of you know that Island View at one time was a city. The owners of the establishments out there, which would have been like Bob Cole at Island View, and Scotty Moad at Scotty's place, which is now Thunderbird. I don't remember who had Rennie Lake Lodge at the time, but they wanted liquor licenses, and so they were trying to get enough people to form a city, so they kept expanding the borders. And they ended up to be 3 miles by 3 miles when it was done. And so they then were issued liquor licenses that they have to this day. But then the laws of Minnesota changed, and so the city of Island View didn't have to exist anymore simply because of liquor. And so the city was dissolved in 1992. I wish that Vern Johnson was here tonight, because he could do a valuable insight of this. His father, Don Johnson, was the first mayor of Island View, and I was the last. But the question now and then is asked of me, with your Grandpa Bob and everything that he was up to for all those years, what do you think of him? Are you ashamed of him or not? And I say, absolutely not. I remember him as a elderly, slight, very quiet man. I was just 9 years old when he passed away. But no, I'm not ashamed of him. It was a different time then. It was a frontier. And, it's just that you couldn't get away with it nowadays, obviously. But back then you could. There was a demand for what he supplied. And it's as simple as that. He was good to his people. I'd heard that if somebody that worked for him, got arrested or whatever, he took care of the family. Well, they were incarcerated. But anyway, I'm going to bring this back to Ashley to finish up with a little more recent story that's kind of on the wall over here about Pappy Heath, and we'll finish up.
Okay, so we're going to wrap up with a little information about Pappy Heath. Some people may be familiar with him, some people may not remember Pappy. Pappy Heath was born and raised in southeastern Kentucky near Somerset. He never went to school, so he did not learn how to read or write, but he was very familiar with how to make whiskey. He came to the Rainy Lake region in 1925, and he worked in the paper mill. He was always very willing to help people. Whenever you needed something done, he was more than willing to come out and give you that hand. He was also very anti-government. He had no problem voicing those sentiments. He felt that the government was better off just to kind of leave people to their own devices, and they would leave the country in better shape than where it was now. He was also very anti-park. He felt that the park was quite damaging, and he did not have any issue telling anyone who wanted to listen about it. He was rumored to feed the ducks on his island his mash after he was feeding it to his pig, and the pig was continuously walking around too drunk. And the ducks apparently were not able to fly off of his island. So it was rumored that he either was smacking them over the head or choking them and then filling his freezer, but he never confirmed exactly what was going on. But he did say that they did not leave not feeling good. So Pappy Heath ran his still, but his end did come in September of 1963. The sheriff's department was dispatched out to Slipper's Island when there was a little bit of a dispute going on between himself and another individual. When the sheriff's department showed up, things had kind of seemed to calm down a little bit, but then as they were leaving, some shots rang out. The sheriff's department panicked. They called into dispatch and they said, hey, you know, Pappy Heath's shooting at us, we need backup. And the dispatcher was like, oh no, he's not shooting at you, because if he was, you'd be dead. So they waited out the night and they called Pappy Heath the next day when they brought out a big megaphone, and Pappy came out to the shore of the island and said, hey, you know, you guys have been out there all night, why didn't you come in for coffee? And they were like, oh, I don't know, probably because you're shooting at us. So they came onto the island and they did end up finding some, you know, a little bit of weapons, but he wasn't a dangerous guy, and they found 35 gallons of moonshine. So he was arraigned and his time on the island did cease, and he was no longer able to make whiskey. But Pappy Heath's recipe is on the board, so if people are interested and you want to give a shot at making your own. He doesn't really have any time, but you should probably let it age. I don't know how long, but he said, you know, just kind of until it looks good. And that's the end. So I guess if anybody has questions or if you have stories that you want to share, that's all we have. So if people have anything for Mike, we thank you for coming out. Sure. Nope, okay.
Sure.
Yeah, give me the microphone. We're pretty fortunate tonight to have someone here who actually remembers Prohibition. Mr. David Trumpeter. You want to come up and tell us a few of your stories, if you can remember them?
Thank you, Mom.
I don't have to make up stories. I live them. Every time they mention one of these names, like Boobie Williams, I knew Boobie Williams. He ran the Whitten up to the Kettle Falls. They pick up fish twice a week. I got to run up there with them because I was friends with young Danny McCarthy, and they ran the fish market thing in Rainier. Anyway, but when you're young, you get impressed with little stuff. Bowie Williams had huge hands, and he could go up to these old Model A's, I think they were 4-cylinder, and he would put his hands on the spark plugs and short out the engine. I know you don't believe that, but I watched it, I saw it. He could short out an engine and just kill it. And well, down the way here was Williams. That was a bar, but of course, I lived in the house over here that Amanda and Jeff, her husband, have remodeled. And we got to, oh, if I even need that. I got to watch the Williams bar thing burn down. My folks wouldn't let me go past the tracks. They said, you can go watch it burn. But when it was running and everything going well, I loved going there because there were real nice looking ladies sitting in the windows, and they always gave us little kids candy. And I'm sure they sold other stuff, but back then I didn't know what that was all about. I'm not sure I do now. But and they talked about Craigville. Peggy Matisse. Is there anybody in here that ever knew Peggy Matisse? Peggy Matisse ran Craigville. And I got into that place because I taught school in Big Fork, Minnesota. and north of that is Effie, Minnesota, and north of that is Craigville. And Peggy ran that place. And she was a nice lady. She'd steal all the money from the loggers, but she always saw to it that when they went back in the woods, they had some new boots and nice mitts and stuff. But she stole all their money. And she used to come up the falls once in a while. She drove a pink Cadillac, and she always wore lots of furs, and she was a spectacular looking woman. And I know she sold more than beer and whiskey, but we won't talk about that. But the football team from Big Fork used to go up there because it was right on the line. And it was just inside Koochiching County. So the Itasca County Sheriff and stuff couldn't deal with anything, it's none of their business. So if they wanted anything, they had to call the falls and get Milton Kahaniuk to come up. Well, by the time Milton got there, they got word that he was coming, they just stepped back into Itasca County. We had the toughest football team that ever known to anybody. They annihilated anybody, which proves that liquor doesn't hurt your athletic ability at all. It enhances it. So, the drink stuff. I said Pappy Heath, I knew him too. And the part that amazed me about Pappy was he made whiskey, he had a still in there, but when the mash was worn out, he threw it on a rock out in front of his place, and the goddamn ducks would eat that mash, and the ducks were all drunk around there. So Pappy ate marinated ducks right from the water. You would catch the ducks with your hands, you didn't have to shoot them. I know you probably blink your eyes and don't believe that, but that's true.
We do.
So who else did he mention?
Is that how you learned to do that by your place?
Me? No, I have other ways. And, well, Rainier has got a reputation.
One-armed Mary.
One-armed Mary?
Yeah, tell us about One-armed Mary.
Well, One-armed Mary, the story is that she walked down the tracks with her dad, hunting, and he swung on a partridge and shot her arm off. That's supposedly true. Anyway, she only had one-armed Mary, and that's why she got called One-armed Mary. She ran a little place called Little Mexico, and you could go in there underage. We were drinking probably at 12, 13, but she always stole your change. She was a thief. But I got even though she always had 2 or 3 of those little Mexican Chihuahua dogs, and they were ankle biters. I hated them. So when I'd go by there on my bicycle, I'd drop kick those sons of bitches. I'd kick them. Well, I could get them about 100 feet. Well, then she wouldn't let me in the bar for a while. I kicked her dog. So.
How about the Fulton family?
Which one?
The Fulton family.
The Fulton family. Well, all I knew, the dad was on the council for a while, and
Yeah, the Shamrock?
The
the
Shamrock.
Shamrock. Oh yeah, that was on. Well, we were drinking at a very young age, so my memory has stunted somewhat. But anyway. And I think I'll cap it up with one stop or a story about my own family. I mean, you just, I don't have to make up stories, I just pay attention. But I came home one night with Donnie Legoo. Some of you must know, not the Donnie that lives on City Beach Road, but Donnie Legoo that used to live back by a ball field we had then. But anyway, we walked in my house, and my father, who was known to be, he would drink a little bit. He was okay when he drank beer, but when he drank whiskey, he turned into a monster. But anyway, he was standing in the middle of the living room floor, stark ass naked, nothing on him. And of course, this Donnie Lagoo was a half-breed Indian, so his eyes were great and big, and he thought, what the hell's this? And my mother's name was Blanche, wonderful lady. She said, well, Elmer, his name was, what are you gonna do? He says, I'm gonna commit suicide because nobody loves me and I don't wanna stay here anymore. She said, well, how are you gonna do it? And he said, I'm gonna jump off the dock and drown. So we stood there and he went out the front door, slammed the door, and away he went. We thought, well, poor Dad's gone. Half an hour later he comes back in. And my mother, Blanche, said, well, Elmer, what's wrong? He said, it's too cold. He chickened out. Anyway, there's a million stories like that. I'll tell you one thing about gang life. I learned all about gang life when I was in Rainier. Somebody's hiding under the table right now. Anyway, I found out that if you belong to a gang, you have to do certain things or they kick you out. And so our gang was headed up by Bobby Hauska. And to this day, he's still living, and he doesn't remember any of that. He doesn't believe it.
It's not true.
Who said that? Anyway. Bobby Hauska was the leader of the pack. How he got that, I don't know. But anyway. First thing you had to do is go up there. They lived on the point, but Hauska's Point we called it. And you have to eat fish flies in the summer. Fish flies cover the walls just thick. Well, you had to go eat 2 or 3 of those every day. If you didn't, you got kicked out. Nobody'd ride their bicycles with you, and you were totally ostracized. So this is how a gang works. If you want to be in the gang, you do what the gang wants you to do. Well, okay, that was one. Then we had, I guess I can tell you, you're all adults. We used to come down here and we removed some rocks, and there was one big quart jar, and everybody had to pee in that jar every once in a while. And everyone had to take the cover off and take a little sniff to see how it was. Well, it's either that or you got nobody to play with. And then if there was a newbie coming in, to get in, he had to sniff the jar. And of course, once he got that out and got it close to his nose, we slapped the bottom of the jar. So he got his face all wet with cold pee. Well, that's gangs are like that. They set up parameters, and you have to do that. And if you don't get to play with anybody. So, anyway, that's the way it goes.
Who got into the poison ivy?
Pardon?
Garland's poison ivy. Your friend poison ivy.
Oh, that's a good one.
Is that how you get into the city council in Rainier?
No, they hire anybody. That's a different thing. Bobby Hauska used to go around with kids, and he would brag about, you can pick up poison ivy, and he'd rub it all up and kind of got the juices, and he rubbed that poison ivy stuff all over himself. He down his pants and everything. And he wasn't immune to poison ivy. He ended up in the hospital. Because the poison ivy went down his throat and everything. He damn near died. But he had garlands of poison ivy on his bicycle and everything. And anyway, learning is such a terrible problem. But anyway, he ended up in the hospital, and then we would sneak in there and laugh at him. Bobby Hauska. Anyway. So anyway, that's the way it was. I remember John Erickson rented boats over here. He had about 20 of them. So one day it rained, and he hired me to bail all these boats out. People used to just row out from right here and catch walleyes all night. But anyway, my job was to bail out these goddamn boats. So I bailed them on a big bucket and then a can. And I thought I was done, and John said, no, it was noon. I worked about 4 hours. And he said, you gotta come back and you gotta sop them out. I didn't have a sponge yet, but I had to take a rag and get all the water out, squeeze them out over that. And that took me the rest of the day. I got done at 5, 6 o'clock, and I went to get paid, and John gave me 50 cents. Well, I went home with that 50 cents, and my dad was going to kill John Erickson because of that. It was quite a deal there. But I never liked John.
Arden never liked that story.
Oh, Arden. Arden never liked me, and I hated Arden Barnes. So that's half a dozen stories there. Arden is buried down by Gein, or down by Crane Lake, and the story is that she's got a chainsaw. In case she comes awake, she can saw her way out of there, and she's got a rifle that shoots anybody that comes near her. And she's dead. You didn't think that was funny, huh? I used to hate her. I'll tell you one story and then I'll quit because this could go on forever. The reason I didn't like her, she made fun of my sisters. Because those were days were poor. My sisters had dresses made out of flour sacks. And they were dyed and they looked good. My mother was a seamstress. But Arden always made fun of them. I thought, I gotta find something that I can rag her about. So finally I realized she had big feet for a wimp woman. I got her. So every time I'd see her, I'd say, Arden, why are you wearing your skis to school? And it just pissed her off, something off, and that made my life better. Anyway, that's enough.
Encore! Encore! One more!
We got one more.
Huh? You got one more? Well, they missed, you mentioned Jess Rose. Mike talked about him. Among other things, he lived next door to me, and he raised chickens. And he took samples off all these boxcars that came through, so he got free feed for the chickens, the old cheapskate. And he treated his wife terribly. He divorced her finally after she helped him save a whole bunch of money, and then he married a kind of a fancier lady. Anyway, I didn't like him. He was a cheat. And I don't know how I got on that. But anyway. But his wife's name was Sadie Rose, and Sadie Rose helped raise the chickens. Well, we used to annoy her once in a while, so she'd chew us out. We're little kids standing there and all that. But when she did that, we'd go down the river and catch a nice northern and throw it in her chicken pen. Well, if you do that, the chickens will eat the northern, and then the eggs taste like northern. They're not good. So we used to come over to the house, and she'd say to my mother, Blanche, the eggs taste so funny. They're so different. But we knew. Anyway. But one story I'll tell you about this house over here that Amanda and Jeff remodeled this house. They spent about $100,000 on that. I lived in that house when it was something else. My folks had to move out of the bedroom in the winter because the frost was about an inch thick on the bedroom. So everybody slept in the living room close to the barrel stove. And that's the way it was. And I knew I was way down on the totem pole. I'll tell this story and I swear I'm gonna quit on this one. We had an outhouse. We didn't have running water and all that kind of stuff. Well, we had 5 kids in the family, and mom and dad, and sometimes the grandparents, and we all used that outhouse. Well, now, you people are younger, you have no idea about this, but eventually, the pile gets higher, and higher, and higher, and finally it's so high that if you sit down and you get stabbed in the hind end, it's not good. So my job, because I was David, my mother always referred to my brother as older Bob. But me, I was David. I had to go down and knock the pile down so we could use it. So I've been knocking the pile down my whole life.
Just think, do you want to thank everybody and plug the jar? Oh, yeah, sure.
Hey, Don Fuller has got a quick story here. This is Don Fuller, better known as the Mugshot.
Hi guys, my name is Don Fuller. I've been coming up here for all my life. My grandmother was Dr. Mary Ghostly, and I don't know if it was a well-known fact or not, but if you had certain symptoms in the Prohibition area, that she would prescribe grain alcohol, just so you know that she was a good doctor. That's all I got.
Thanks, Don. I bet in the whole state of Florida there's not a gathering like this tonight. I want to thank all of you for coming. I want to thank our hosts, Paul and Matt.
Thank you.
Oh, and we do have a donation jar here for the museum. And anybody like to contribute, it's much appreciated. Always low on cost. But thanks all for coming.
I got one.